The mistaken identity Naomi Winters tucked a rebellious curl behind her ear as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes. The weight of the crystal glasses was nothing compared to the heaviness of her student loans. At 32, with a doctorate in culinary anthropology and a passion for documenting vanishing food traditions, she hadn't expected to be moonlighting as event staff at San Francisco's most exclusive charity gala. "Remember, this is research," she muttered to herself, scanning the ballroom of the Sycamore Hotel, where tech billionaires and venture capitalists mingled in their finery. Her dissertation advisor had always emphasized the value of participant observation. Tonight she was observing the feeding habits of the ultra-wealthy, a species that consumed $30 appetizers without a second thought. The Emerald Foundation's annual gala was ostensibly about ocean conservation, though Naomi noted the irony of endangered bluefin tuna being served on mother-of-pearl plates. She wove between guests with practiced invisibility, a skill perfected through years of fieldwork in communities from Oaxaca to Osaka. "Excuse me," a deep voice interrupted her anthropological musings. "Is that Veuve Clicquot-Rosé?" Naomi turned, to find herself facing a tall man with observant hazel eyes and the subtle confidence of someone who never needed to prove his worth. Unlike the other peacocking executives with their flashy watches and louder-than-necessary laughs, he wore his bespoke suit like it was an afterthought. "No, it's Dom Perignon 2008, she replied, offering the tray. "Apparently Veuve is too pedestrian for this crowd." The corner of his mouth quirked upward. "You don't sound impressed." "Should I be?" Naomi asked, forgetting momentarily that she was supposed to be invisible. "It's just fermented grape juice with bubbles." Instead of offense, his expression reflected surprise, then amusement. "Blasphemy in these circles. I'm Julian Hayes, by the way." The name registered distantly, something about revolutionary food supply chain technology, but Naomi was too tired to place it precisely. "Naomi," she replied simply, omitting her last name as staff were instructed to do. Julian studied her with unexpected interest. "You're clearly not enjoying the spectacle. What brings you to the Emerald Gala, Naomi?" His assumption that she was a guest rather than staff momentarily stunned her. Glancing down, she realized she'd grabbed a black cocktail dress from her car rather than the standard server uniform after her last-minute call to fill in. The tray was her only identifier as staff. "I'm actually," she began, but was interrupted by a commotion near the stage. "If you'll excuse me," Julian said, his attention drawn to a silver-haired man gesturing urgently in his direction. "Perhaps we can continue this conversation later? You're the only person who's been honest about the champagne." Before she could correct his misunderstanding, Julian was gone, swallowed by the crowd of Silicon Valley elite. "He thought you were a guest," whispered Dina, another server passing by with empty glasses. "That was Julian Hayes. His company, Provision Systems, is revolutionizing global food distribution. Worth about $4 billion last I checked." Naomi felt a flutter of unease. He just seemed like a person who was bored at a party. "Trust me, people would kill to have his attention for 5 seconds, Dina replied. And honey, that wasn't boredom in his eyes. The evening progressed with Naomi periodically catching Julian's gaze across the room. During the auction, she noticed him bid casually on a Maldives vacation package, winning it with a flick of his paddle at $175,000. The amount made her stomach clench. It was more than enough to fund her entire heritage food documentation project. Later, as the crowd thinned and the orchestra played softer melodies, Naomi stepped onto the terrace for air. The San Francisco skyline glittered beneath a velvet sky, reminding her why she loved this impossible city despite its crushing cost of living. "So," Julian's voice came from behind her, "what would you do with $1 million, Naomi, who isn't impressed by Dom Perignon?" She turned, meeting his curious gaze with unexpected steadiness. "I'd save the world's disappearing food traditions, one recipe at a time." His eyebrow arched with genuine interest. "Tell me more." The proposition. The morning after the gala, Naomi woke to an email that nearly caused her to spill coffee across her tiny apartment's worn kitchen counter. Dr. Winters, yes, I found out who you really are. Would you be willing to discuss your heritage food preservation project further? I have a proposition that might interest you. Julian Hayes, attached was an invitation to Provision Systems headquarters in South San Francisco that afternoon. Naomi stared at her phone in disbelief, debating whether to respond. Her academic instincts screamed to investigate this opportunity, while her pride bristled at his discovery of her moonlighting as waitstaff. "What do you think, Pepper?" she asked her elderly rescue cat, who responded with characteristic indifference. "You're right. What's the worst that could happen?" 4 hours later, Naomi found herself in a sleek elevator ascending 30 floors above the bay. She'd chosen her most professional outfit, a structured blazer over a simple blouse and her one pair of decent slacks, though it felt woefully inadequate as she passed employees in casual tech luxury wear that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Julian's assistant, a poised woman named Vivian, led her through an open office space where massive screens displayed real-time food supply data from around the world. "Our mission is optimizing food distribution to reduce waste and increase access," Vivian explained, noticing Naomi's interest. "Mr. Hayes believes food security is the foundation of global stability." When they reached Julian's office, a surprisingly modest space with walls of books instead of the expected tech trophies, he greeted her with that same half-smile from the gala. "Dr. Winters, thank you for coming. I hope you don't mind that I looked you up. You have more resources than most of my academic peers," Naomi replied, accepting his handshake. "Though I'm curious why you'd bother researching a server you met for 5 minutes. Julian gestured for her to sit in one of 2 chairs facing floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay. "Because most people at that gala would have pretended to love Dom Perignon even if they hated it. Authenticity is rare in my circles." He leaned forward. "And then you mentioned saving disappearing food traditions. I was intrigued." "It's my life's work," Naomi admitted. "Traditional food practices are vanishing at an alarming rate. With them, we lose cultural knowledge, biodiversity, and sustainable practices developed over centuries." Julian nodded thoughtfully. "I reviewed your dissertation on indigenous grain preservation techniques in Peru. Brilliant work." Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks. No one outside her academic committee had actually read her 300-page thesis. "You reviewed my dissertation overnight? I don't sleep much," he said dismissively. "Tell me about the project you'd fund with $1 million. Taking a deep breath, Naomi outlined her vision. A comprehensive multimedia archive documenting endangered culinary traditions, combining anthropological research with practical preservation of recipes, techniques, and cultural contexts. The FICE communities I work with don't want their traditions in museums. They want them alive, practiced, and respected," she explained, her usual reserve melting away as passion took over. "But they're fighting against economic pressures, climate change, and globalization." Julian listened with unexpected intensity, occasionally asking incisive questions that revealed genuine understanding. When she finished, he rose and walked to the window. "I'm prepared to fund your project," he said finally, "but not with $1 million. Naomi's heart sank. Of course he'd found her proposal lacking. "I'm offering $5 million, Julian continued, turning to face her. "With certain conditions." The figure made her dizzy. "What conditions?" "First, the project becomes a Provision Systems initiative, with you as director. Second, we expand beyond documentation to implementation, creating sustainable market pathways for these traditional foods." His eyes held hers steadily. "And third, I want to be personally involved, not just as a funder, but as a participant in your fieldwork." Naomi blinked in confusion. "You want to come with me? To remote villages and urban immigrant communities?" "Precisely." Something vulnerable flickered across his features. My company moves millions of tons of food annually, but I've lost touch with the human element, the cultural significance of what we distribute. I need to understand it better. The proposition was unprecedented. Academic funding typically came with bureaucratic strings, not billionaires insisting on personal involvement. "Why me?" she asked finally. "There are more established researchers in this field." Julian's expression softened. "Because you see beyond the surface. You recognized the hypocrisy of serving endangered tuna at an ocean conservation event. You value substance over appearance." He paused. "And frankly, you didn't treat me differently when you didn't know who I was." The opportunity was extraordinary, but Naomi hesitated. "I'd need complete academic freedom. These communities trust me. I won't exploit them for corporate gain. I understand your concerns," Julian said, "but consider this. I can provide resources far beyond traditional grants: global transportation, technological support, distribution networks. Together, we might actually save these traditions rather than just documenting their disappearance." As Julian laid out his vision, Naomi realized he was offering something revolutionary, a bridge between academic preservation and practical sustainability. Yet the power imbalance between them was undeniable. "I need time to consider," she said finally. Julian nodded, respecting her caution. "Take all the time you need, but there's one more thing you should know." He hesitated, uncharacteristically, uncertain. "This isn't just a business decision for me. Something about our conversation last night. It reminded me why I started this company in the first place." Looking into his eyes, Naomi sensed something unexpected. A man seeking not just a project to fund, but perhaps a different way of seeing the world he'd helped shape. "1 week," she said, rising to leave. "I'll give you my answer in 1 week." As the elevator descended, Naomi's mind raced with possibilities and warnings. $5 million could preserve countless traditions. But at what cost to her independence? And why couldn't she shake the feeling that Julian Hayes was offering something more complex than a simple business partnership? The partnership. 3 months after accepting Julian's proposition, Naomi found herself in a small boat navigating the brackish waters of the Sundarbans in West Bengal. Beside her sat Julian Hayes, billionaire tech mogul, currently sweating through his linen shirt as they traveled to document the honey-gathering traditions of the local communities. "You know," she remarked, watching him swat at mosquitoes, "when you insisted on fieldwork participation, I didn't think you'd actually come to every location." Julian's laugh carried across the water. "Having second thoughts about our arrangement? Dr. Winters?" "Just surprised by your commitment," she admitted. This was their 4th expedition together, following trips to Oaxaca for heirloom corn preservation, a small island in Japan for century-old fermentation techniques, and a week with Bedouin communities in Jordan. To her continuing amazement, Julian had proven himself a dedicated student of cultural food traditions. He asked thoughtful questions, showed genuine respect to community elders, and demonstrated surprising skill at connecting their preservation work to practical market solutions. His technological expertise had already helped 3 communities develop sustainable packaging for traditional products, creating economic incentives to maintain ancient practices. "Look there." Their guide, Priya, pointed toward the dense mangroves. "The honey collectors prepare their boats. We are just in time." As they approached the shore, Naomi observed Julian carefully adjusting his camera settings. He'd taken to documentation with unexpected enthusiasm, his engineer's precision complementing her anthropological approach. "Remember," she whispered as they disembarked, "let me establish rapport before you mention any business possibilities. These communities have been exploited before." Julian nodded, following her lead as they approached the honey collectors. What had initially been an awkward power dynamic, billionaire funder and academic director, had gradually evolved into something resembling equal partnership. Julian deferred to her expertise in cultural contexts, while she increasingly valued his practical insights on sustainability. The day unfolded in a rhythm they'd established over their travels. Naomi conducting interviews about the honey-gathering traditions, the songs, the protective practices, the generational knowledge, while Julian documented and occasionally offered technological solutions to challenges the collectors mentioned. They faced the same issue as the Oaxacan corn farmers, he noted during a break, as they shared sweet tea with the community elders. Their product is superior, but lacks verification methods that would command premium prices in global markets. Not everything needs to enter the global market, Naomi countered, though without her initial defensiveness. Their philosophical differences had become productive dialogues rather than arguments. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their modest guest house reviewing footage, the usual professional boundary between them felt thinner. Perhaps it was. The humidity or the haunting honey collector songs still echoing in their minds. But Naomi found herself sharing more than field notes. My grandmother was the one who inspired this work, she admitted, scrolling through photographs. She was Filipino, from a small fishing village. By the time I was old enough to really learn from her, so many traditions had already been lost. No one had recorded her family's recipes or preservation techniques. Julian's expression softened in the lantern light. That explains your dedication. This is personal for you. Isn't everything personal ultimately? She asked. What about you? Running a multi-billion-dollar company seems worlds away from sitting in mosquito-infested mangroves documenting honey collection. Julian was quiet for a moment, his usual confidence replaced by contemplation. My parents were immigrants, Iranian refugees who arrived with nothing. Food was their connection to home. My mother could recreate tastes from memory, dishes her grandmother had taught her. He stared into the darkness beyond their porch. When she died, those recipes died with her. I was too busy building provision to properly document them. The revelation shifted something between them. Naomi had assumed Julian's interest was purely intellectual or commercial. The glimpse of personal loss humanized him in a way 3 months of travel somehow hadn't. Perhaps that's why this project spoke to you, she suggested gently. Perhaps. His eyes met hers with unexpected vulnerability. Or perhaps it was the person presenting it. The air between them charged with unspoken possibility. For months, Naomi had maintained professional distance, convinced Julian's interest was in her work, not her. Now, watching his face in the gentle lantern light, she wasn't so sure. The moment was interrupted by Priya calling them for dinner. As they rose to join their hosts, Julian's hand briefly touched Naomi's, a gesture that might have been accidental, but felt deliberate. That night, reviewing their partnership agreement in her journal, Naomi noted the unexpected developments with scientific detachment. Subject, self, experiencing conflicting reactions to research partner. Professional boundaries, becoming permeable, recommend caution and further observation. But her typically analytical mind couldn't rationalize away the warmth that spread through her chest when Julian looked at her across the dinner table, or the way their collaboration had become seamless, each anticipating the other's thoughts. As she drifted to sleep beneath her mosquito netting, Naomi wondered if she'd made a fundamental research error, failing to account for her own susceptibility to connection when immersed in the intimacy of shared purpose and discovery. Tomorrow they would document ancient honey-gathering techniques. Tonight she acknowledged a different kind of gathering was occurring, the collecting of moments, glances, and shared understandings that were building toward something neither of them had included in their carefully constructed partnership agreement. The revelation. The coastal village of Puerto Escondido shimmered in the Mexican heat as Naomi interviewed Doña Esperanza, an 83-year-old guardian of pre-Hispanic fishing preservation techniques. 6 months into their partnership, the Heritage Food Preservation Project had documented over 40 endangered culinary traditions across 3 continents. Ask her about the salt-curing method again, Julian suggested in the fluid Spanish he'd been perfecting during their travels. The timing seems critical to the preservation process. Naomi nodded, impressed as always by his attention to technical details she might have overlooked. Their working relationship had evolved into something extraordinary, professional respect, deepening into friendship, and increasingly, something more complex that neither had acknowledged directly. That evening, reviewing their footage in the small beachfront research cottage, Julian's phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for urgent business matters. He stepped outside to take the call, returning with an uncharacteristically troubled expression. "Everything okay?" Naomi asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Just business complications," he replied vaguely, returning to their work with diminished focus. The next morning, Naomi rose early for her usual swim and found a group of local fishermen gathered on the beach, expressions grim as they examined documents. "¿Qué pasa?" she asked, her research-honed Spanish serving her well. One fisherman, Marco, whom she'd interviewed the previous week, handed her a legal notice. "Development company," he explained bitterly. "They bought the land north of the village. Our access to the traditional fishing grounds will be cut off. The ecosystem that sustains our methods will be destroyed for a resort." Naomi's stomach tightened as she examined the document. "What company is behind this?" Marco pointed to the letterhead. "Helios Development Group, a subsidiary of Provision Enterprises." The world tilted beneath Naomi's feet. Provision Enterprises, Julian's parent company. The very organization funding their preservation work was simultaneously destroying the traditions they were documenting. When she confronted Julian in their cottage, the papers trembling in her hand, his expression confirmed her worst fears before he spoke. "I was going to tell you," he began, running a hand through his hair. "I just found out yesterday. Helios operates independently. I don't oversee their acquisitions directly." "Don't oversee?" Naomi's voice rose. "You're the CEO. This community trusted us, trusted me. Their fishing traditions date back centuries, and your company is about to bulldoze their access to ancestral waters for what? Another luxury resort?" Julian's jaw tightened. "It's more complicated than that. Helios acquired that property years ago. The development plans were already in motion before our project even began. And you never thought to mention this potential conflict?" The betrayal cut deep, not just professionally, but personally. For months, she'd been letting her guard down, believing Julian's commitment to preservation was genuine. "I didn't know about this specific development," he insisted, reaching for her arm. "Naomi, please," she pulled away. "These people welcomed us into their homes, shared their knowledge, and all along, we were just—" "What? Documenting traditions before your company destroyed them? Creating some kind of corporate archive of cultures your business practices help extinguish?" The hurt in Julian's eyes seemed genuine, but Naomi couldn't separate truth from performance anymore. "Was any of this real, or was I just a convenient academic cover for corporate expansion?" "That's not fair." Julian's voice hardened. "Everything between us has been real. The project, the work we've done." "The work I've done," Naomi corrected, gathering her research materials. "While you, apparently, were playing both sides." She stormed out, seeking refuge with Doña Esperanza. The elderly woman listened to her fragmented explanation, then nodded sagely. "The old and new worlds have always collided, Nina. The question is not whether change will come, but who will control it, and whether wisdom will guide it." That evening, as Naomi sat on the beach watching fishing boats return with their day's catch, Julian found her. He didn't speak immediately, just lowered himself to the sand beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I've spent the day on calls," he finally said, voice rough with fatigue. "The Helios development has been suspended pending review." Naomi turned to study his face, searching for deception. "Just like that?" "Not just like that. There will be financial consequences. But it was the right decision." He met her gaze directly. "I should have known about this conflict." Should have prevented it. You were right to call me out. His admission softened her anger slightly. One development suspended doesn't change the fundamental issue, Julian. Your company's global expansion often threatens the very traditions we're trying to preserve. I know. The simple acknowledgement surprised her. That's why I need you, not just for this project, but to help transform how provision operates globally. Naomi shook her head. I'm an anthropologist, not a corporate consultant. You're more than that, Julian insisted. You see connections between tradition and innovation that most miss. You understand that preservation isn't about freezing cultures in amber. It's about keeping wisdom alive while communities evolve. The setting sun cast long shadows across the sand as Naomi considered his words. The anger remained, but alongside it grew a recognition of opportunity. If provision could be influenced from within, I need time, she said finally, and transparency. Complete transparency about all provision operations that might impact the communities we work with. Julian nodded solemnly. You'll have it. And something else. He hesitated. I've been working on restructuring provisions governance. I want to create an ethics council with real power, including veto authority over developments like this one. I'd like you to head it. The proposition was unexpected, a genuine shift in corporate power dynamics rather than a symbolic gesture. Why would you do that? She asked, searching his face. Julian looked out toward the horizon, where traditional fishing boats moved alongside modern vessels. Because you were right about another thing. Everything is personal, ultimately. His voice softened. These past 6 months changed me, Naomi. The communities we've visited, the traditions we've documented, they've shown me a different way of measuring value. As the light faded from the sky, Naomi realized they stood at a crossroads, not just professionally, but personally. The path forward was uncertain, filled with potential conflicts and compromises. Yet something in Julian's expression, a mixture of humility and hope, made her willing to at least consider the possibility of reconciliation. I'll think about it, she said finally. But Julian, if we continue this partnership, any partnership, it has to be built on complete honesty. No more surprises. He nodded, relief visible in the relaxing of his shoulders. Complete honesty, he agreed, extending his hand as if to seal a new contract between them. As their fingers touched, Naomi felt the familiar spark that had been growing over months of shared work and discovery. The breach of trust had wounded their connection, but perhaps, like the ancient preservation techniques they'd been documenting, there were ways to transform even bitter experiences into something that could endure. The resolution 1 year after the Puerto Escondido confrontation, Naomi stood before an audience of community representatives, corporate executives, and academic colleagues in Provision Systems' redesigned headquarters. The central atrium, once a monument to technological innovation, now featured living displays of heritage crops and traditional food preparation areas alongside the company's cutting-edge logistics screens. The Heritage Food Sustainability Initiative marks a fundamental shift in how corporations interact with traditional knowledge, she explained, gesturing to the interactive map behind her showing the 53 communities now participating in their expanded program. By creating economic pathways for endangered food traditions, we're proving that preservation and progress can coexist. From the front row, Julian watched with undisguised pride. The past year had transformed both his company and their relationship. The Ethics Council Naomi now chaired had real power, already halting 3 developments that threatened cultural heritage sites and redirecting billions in corporate investment toward community-led initiatives. After her presentation, as guests explored the living exhibits, Julian found Naomi in a quiet corner examining the latest prototype, a blockchain-based verification system allowing indigenous producers to authenticate their traditional products. Dr. Winters, he greeted her formally, eyes dancing with private amusement. Your presentation was remarkable. Mr. Hayes, she returned with equal formality, though her lips curved upward. Your company's transformation has exceeded expectations. They'd learned to navigate their public roles alongside their private connection, a delicate balance that had deepened through continued challenges and reconciliations. Later that evening, after the last guests departed, they walked through San Francisco's Chinatown, where they'd helped local elders establish a teaching kitchen for disappearing Toisan cooking techniques. "Remember when you thought I was just another bored billionaire at a charity gala?" Julian asked, his hand finding hers as they passed beneath lanterns swaying in the evening breeze. "Remember when you thought I was just a waitress?" she countered, squeezing his fingers. They stopped before a small tea house where elderly community members played mahjong while teaching younger generations the social rituals surrounding the game. "I have something to show you," Julian said, leading her to a quiet table in the corner. From his pocket, he produced not the jewelry box Naomi half expected, but a small, worn notebook. "My mother's recipes," he explained, voice softening. "I hired translators and spent months tracking down relatives in Iran. It's incomplete, but—" Naomi carefully opened the fragile pages, recognizing the priceless cultural treasure it represented, not for its monetary value, but for the connection it preserved across generations. "This is beautiful, Julian," she whispered, understanding the personal milestone this represented for him. "There's something else." He hesitated, uncharacteristically nervous. The Winters Hayes Foundation, independent from provision, focused entirely on cultural preservation. Equal governance with representatives from every community in our network. The proposal took her breath away. "Julian, we've proven the model works," he continued. "But some traditions need protection beyond what a corporate structure can provide. The foundation would ensure that preservation continues regardless of market forces." Naomi studied his face. No longer the guarded billionaire she'd met a year and a half ago, but a partner who had grown alongside her through conflict and collaboration. "There's one condition," she said finally. Julian raised an eyebrow, waiting. "The foundation headquarters can't be in some sterile office building. It needs to be somewhere real communities gather, where traditions are lived daily, not just studied." His smile broadened. "I was thinking the same thing. In fact—" He pulled out his phone, showing her images of a modest building in the heart of the Mission District. "The owner is a third-generation baker who needs funding to maintain her grandmother's bread-making traditions. The upper floors could house the foundation, while the bakery continues below." The thoughtfulness of the proposal, honoring both her professional vision and personal values, moved Naomi deeply. This was the Julian she'd come to love. The man who matched big ideas with genuine respect for the small, human elements that gave those ideas meaning. "Partners?" he asked softly, the question carrying multiple layers of meaning. Naomi considered how far they'd traveled from that first mistaken meeting, through conflict, betrayal, reconciliation, and growth. The journey had transformed them both. Julian had learned to see beyond efficiency and scale to the human stories behind traditional practices. She had learned that meaningful preservation sometimes required engaging with modern systems rather than just documenting their impact. "Partners?" she agreed, reaching across the table to take both his hands in hers. Outside the tea house window, the city pulsed with its contradictions, ancient traditions alongside cutting-edge innovation, wealth beside struggle, preservation against development. What Naomi and Julian had built together wasn't a perfect solution to these tensions, but a way of navigating them with integrity and purpose. As they shared tea in the traditional way, each pouring for the other rather than themselves, Naomi reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her here. She had once believed that preserving cultural traditions meant keeping them separate from commerce and technology. Julian had once believed that optimization and scale were the ultimate measures of success. Together, they'd discovered a more complex truth, that meaningful preservation required both cultural understanding and practical sustainability. Both. Respect for tradition and pathways for evolution, to Fortune's whisper, Julian toasted softly, raising his teacup. And to listening when it speaks, Naomi completed, her cup meeting his with a gentle chime that echoed with possibility. The unexpected partnership that had begun with a mistaken identity had evolved into something neither could have imagined, alone. A new model for bridging worlds that had too long existed in opposition, and a love built not on fantasy, but on the harder, more rewarding work of genuine understanding.